My sister was protecting me from our dad, who was recording her for a website. He ran until I found out, and mom slapped me for trying to call police because she's doing this for you. Then, after years of court battles, where dad's cop brother helped cover everything up, they finally arrested our parents when the FBI found the financial records from his website and the Johnstons adopted us. I was 14 when I walked in on my dad recording my sister. She was holding back tears while undoing the hem of her skirt, and he had one hand in his pants. On the computer beside him, I saw a website open with child videos for sale. I quietly backed out and ran to mom's office to tell her. She set down her book real slow, then looked at me with these angry eyes. The slap that followed came so fast I didn't even see her arm move. Your sister is doing this for you. Would you rather it be you in there? I clutched my cheek, then signed to my mom asking her what she meant. I didn't expect her to tell me, but she did. According to her, dad had his needs, and originally wanted to film me. But Kesha overheard them. She wanted to protect me, and volunteered to be the one getting filmed instead. I remember my world pausing. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to grab the phone and call police ASAP, but my mom stopped me. Keisha already tried that, honey, she said, grabbing my arm. Do you really think that scar on her back was just clumsiness? After that, I started watching every interaction between Kesha and our dad in a new light. I started remembering how his fingers would rest on her wrist, how he'd rest both hands on her shoulders, thumbs pressing into the base of her neck. I always thought it was innocent. Now it made my skin crawl. And after I told mom, the cat was out of the bag, meaning dad no longer contained himself at all. I remember the very next day during dinner, dad caught her trying to leave the table early. Kesha, come give your old man a hug goodnight. She paused mid-step, then turned around and walked to him like she was walking to her execution. He pulled her onto his lap, wrapped his arms around her waist, and held her there while he finished his meal. My special girl, he whispered into her hair, loud enough for every one of us to hear. Keisha sat rigid as a corpse, eyes fixed on nothing, until he finally patted her hip twice, his permission to go. That night was the beginning of the end. At 11 p.m., mom came in to check on Kesha, and I heard her scream. I ran up and saw it. Kesha lay across her bed, 3 empty prescription bottles bedside her, foam oozing out of her mouth. While we waited for the ambulance, mom paced back and forth, muttering about selfishness. The EMTs worked on Kesha while dad made phone calls in the corner. His brother showed up at the hospital in full officer uniform. He pulled the doctor into a side room, and when they came out, suddenly everyone was using words like teenage drama and attention-seeking behavior. They decided Kesha needed time at a specialized facility upstate. For 2 months, I was alone in the house. And even worse now without Keisha, dad turned his attention to me. Now I was the one his hands lingered on. I was the one forced to sit on his lap. I was the one into whose room he'd come in at night with a camera. I remember he began recording me the same way he recorded Kesha. Even bought me the same schoolgirl outfits and everything. Mom also started giving me these new anxiety pills right around this time that made everything feel underwater. When Keisha came back 2 months later, I was a shell, and she moved like a broken marionette. Her clothes hung off her frame. Her eyes stayed fixed on some point past everyone's head. Our parents had broken us both. That night, they sat us down in the living, and mom announced new rules. There would be no unsupervised contact between us, no closed doors, no passing notes. Dad explained Kesha had been diagnosed with violent and manipulative behaviors, and mom added that isolation was a medical necessity. Months crawled by like this. Kesha moved like she was sleepwalking. She'd sit in her room staring at nothing. The only time I saw life flicker back into her eyes was when dad would get that particular look. He'd mention needing to work on a project after dinner, and his gaze would drift to me. That's when Kesha would suddenly spill something or break a dish, anything to pull his attention. I can help with your project, she'd say, her voice flat but firm. Dad would study her for a long moment, then nod. They'd disappear into his office. She'd come out hours later and go straight to the bathroom. I'd hear the shower running until the hot water ran out. One time dad cornered me when Kesha was at a mandatory counseling appointment. He sat on my bed, told me Kesha was getting difficult, and maybe it was time for fresh perspectives in his projects. As soon as I realized what he meant, Kesha burst through the front door. She'd faked sick to come home early. She took one look at him in my room and started screaming about how he'd promised. Just screaming, "You promised," over and over until mom had to sedate her. That was my breaking point. I knew I could no longer live like this. And so, the very next day at school, I mustered up the strength to tell my teacher everything, from the filming, to the no contact, to the anxiety pills. My teacher looked horrified, and by afternoon, police cars filled our driveway. They put dad in handcuffs right on the front lawn while neighbors watched from their windows. Mom went in a separate car, screaming about ungrateful children and ruined lives. The Johnstons took us as emergency placement. They had a nice house with separate bedrooms and a dog named Max. The prosecutor visited twice, preparing us to testify. But then, just as we thought we were safe, dad's lawyer started finding cracks. Jargon like improper evidence collection, broken chain of custody, Fourth Amendment violations. The judge tossed most of the charges, and after 180 days in county jail, dad walked out on bail. The prosecutor called that evening. Catherine's voice sounded tired through the phone. She explained that dad's release meant new restrictions for us. No contact orders were in place, but she warned us he might try indirect approaches. The Johnstons sat with us during the call, Mrs. Johnston's hand on my shoulder while Mr. Johnston took notes. After hanging up, I watched Kesha stare at the wall. Her fingers traced patterns on her jeans, the same nervous habit from when dad would call her to his office. Max, the Johnston's golden retriever, pressed against her leg. She didn't pet him, just let her hand rest on his head. Mrs. Johnston started dinner preparations while Mr. Johnston secured the doors and windows. They'd done this routine every night since we arrived, but tonight felt different. The deadbolt clicked louder, the curtains pulled tighter. During dinner, nobody mentioned dad. We passed potatoes and green beans like any other night. Kesha pushed food around her plate, constructing small mountains she never ate. I managed 3 bites before my stomach clenched. The Johnstons exchanged glances but didn't push us to eat more. That night, I lay awake listening to house sounds. Every creak made me freeze. Around midnight, soft footsteps padded past my door. Through the crack underneath, I saw Kesha's shadow pause. She stood there for maybe 5 minutes before continuing to the bathroom. The faucet ran, stopped, ran again. Morning brought a registered letter. Mr. Johnston signed for it, his jaw tightening as he read the return address. Dad's lawyer. He called Catherine immediately while Mrs. Johnston made us breakfast. I caught fragments of the conversation. Something about depositions, character witnesses, Kesha's medical records from the facility. School felt surreal. Kids complained about homework and weekend plans while my mind mind replayed the prosecutor's warnings. My English teacher asked if I was feeling alright. I nodded and focused on my essay about symbolism in To Call a Mockingbird. The irony wasn't lost on me. Kesha attended a different school now, part of keeping us safe. The Johnstons drove us separately, coordinating schedules like a military operation. After school, Mrs. Johnston picked me up first. We waited in the parking lot of Kesha's school, engine running. When Kesha climbed in, she clutched a manila envelope. Her guidance counselor had given it to her. Inside, a letter from Mom's lawyer requesting Kesha's therapy notes. Mrs. Johnston's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. She drove us straight to Catherine's office. The prosecutor's waiting room smelled like coffee and stress. Catherine emerged after 20 minutes, reading the letter with a deepening frown. She explained that Mom's lawyer was building a case about parental alienation. They wanted to paint us as troubled kids who made up stories. Back at the Johnstons, dinner was quieter than usual. Kesha excused herself early, heading upstairs with Max trailing behind. I helped clear plates, noting how Mr. Johnston double-checked the locks again. Through the kitchen window, I spotted a car parked across the street. Blue sedan, tinted windows. Mr. Johnston noticed my stare and gently pulled the curtain closed. He made a phone call, speaking in low tones. Within 10 minutes, a police cruiser circled our block. The blue sedan left. Catherine visited the next morning with a victim advocate named Kat. They explained the upcoming legal proceedings. Dad's trial would take months. We'd need to testify. The defense would try to discredit us. Kat handed us each a journal, suggesting we write down any contact attempts or unusual incidents. That afternoon, the school secretary called me to the office. A flower delivery sat on the counter. No card, just white roses, Kesha's favorite. The secretary thought it was sweet until she saw my face. She called Mrs. Johnston immediately. The flowers went straight into the garbage. Mrs. Johnston drove me home a different route, checking mirrors constantly. At home, Kesha was already there, her own journal open. She'd received flowers too, pink carnations at her school. Also no card. Catherine added it to her file. She explained it didn't violate the no contact order since there was no proof Dad sent them. Well, nothing says family dysfunction quite like Dad getting handcuffed on the front lawn while the whole neighborhood watches. Bet that HOA meeting got real interesting after that happened, but we all knew. It was his way of saying he was watching, that he knew our schedules, our schools, our favorites. The Johnstons installed security cameras that weekend. Mr. Johnston spent Saturday mounting them while Mrs. Johnston taught us to use the alarm system. 4 digits to arm, different 4 to indicate duress. Panic button by each bed. Sunday brought another letter, this time from Dad directly, sent through his lawyer. He wrote about missing us, about mistakes and misunderstandings, about how the situation had been blown out of proportion. His words made my skin crawl the same way his hands used to. Kesha read it once, then handed it to Catherine, who'd started coming by daily. The prosecutor added it to her growing file. Evidence of manipulation, she said. Character evidence for sentencing if we got that far. School became a refuge. For 6 hours, I could pretend to be normal. My grades improved. Teachers commented on my focus. What they didn't know was that calculus problems and history dates gave my mind somewhere safe to go. Keisha struggled more. The Johnstons got calls about her falling asleep in class, about missing assignments, about sitting alone at lunch, staring at nothing. The school counselor increased her sessions. 2 weeks into Dad's release, Mom made her move. She showed up at my school with legal papers, something about emergency custody. The principal kept me in his office while security prevented her from entering. Her shouts echoed down the hallway about her rights as a mother. Police arrived within minutes. Mom left before they could serve her with violation papers, but she'd made her point. She could reach us. The system that was supposed to protect us had holes. That night, Kesha broke her silence. She told the Johnstons about the videos Dad made, about the website, about the men who paid to watch. Her voice stayed flat, emotionless, like reading a grocery list. Mrs. Johnston cried. Mr. Johnston's face turned colors I'd never seen. Catherine arrived within an hour with 2 FBI agents. They specialized in online crimes against children. Kesha repeated her story. I added mine. The agents took notes, asked careful questions, promised to investigate. The next morning brought consequences. Dad's lawyer filed motions claiming we were being coached, that the Johnstons had poisoned us against our parents, that bringing in federal agents proved the local case was falling apart. School felt different now. Every car in the parking lot could be watching. Every delivery could be a message. The principal assigned a security officer to shadow me between classes. Not obvious enough to draw attention, but there. Kesha's school did the same. She hated it more than I did. Started skipping lunch to avoid the cafeteria. Spent free periods in the counselor's office. Her grades dropped further. The Johnstons tried to help. Family dinners with forced normalcy. Movie nights where we'd pretend to watch while really just sitting together. Max became our constant companion, following whoever seemed most anxious. 3 weeks after Dad's release, the blue sedan returned. This time it parked right in front of our house. Mr. Johnston called police immediately. The car left before they arrived, but we'd all seen the driver, Dad's brother, the officer who'd helped cover everything up before. Catherine filed complaints. Internal Affairs opened an investigation, but Dad's brother knew the system. He'd been careful. No direct contact, no threats, just presence, just reminders that badges couldn't always protect us. The following week, Catherine arranged for us to give our depositions. The defense attorney arrived at the courthouse wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than the Johnstons' monthly mortgage. He set up his recording equipment methodically, arranging papers with practiced precision. I went first. For 3 hours, he picked apart every detail of my story. He asked about the anxiety pills, suggesting they caused hallucinations. He questioned why I hadn't told anyone sooner. He implied that Kesha had coached me, that we'd conspired together out of teenage rebellion. My hands shook under the table, but I kept my voice steady, repeating the truth over and over. Kesha's deposition lasted even longer. The attorney brought up her sewer slide attempt, her time at the facility, the medications she'd been prescribed. He twisted every protective action she'd taken into evidence of instability. When he suggested she'd imagined everything due to mental illness, Kesha's fingernails dug crescents into her palms, but she never broke composure. Catherine sat with us afterward in her office, explaining that this was standard defense strategy. She assured us our testimony was strong, that the FBI's investigation into the website would provide concrete evidence, but I could see the worry lines deepening around her eyes. That evening, the Johnstons found an envelope taped to their mailbox. Inside were printed screenshots from social media accounts we didn't even know existed. Fake profiles using our names, posting about partying, substances, running away. The posts were dated months ago, during the time we'd been trapped at home. Dad had been building building his defense long before his arrest. Mrs. Johnston immediately called Catherine, who contacted a digital forensics expert. The expert explained that proving the accounts were fake would take time and money. Time we didn't have before the trial. Money the state wouldn't provide for this kind of investigation. School became increasingly difficult. Somehow rumors had started spreading. Kids whispered about the troubled sisters, who'd made up stories about their parents. Someone had been talking, planting seeds of doubt. I found notes in my locker calling me a liar. Kesha discovered her textbooks vandalized with cruel messages. The school administration tried to help, but they couldn't stop the whispers. They couldn't prevent the isolation. Even teachers started looking at us differently, their smiles forced, their concern tinged with uncertainty. One afternoon, I arrived at my locker to find it standing open. Nothing was missing, but everything had been touched, moved slightly. A message that someone could get to me even here. The security officer reviewed footage but found nothing. Whoever did it knew the camera blind spots. Kesha started having panic attacks during class. The counselor would call Mrs. Johnston, who would leave work to pick her up. Each incident went into a file somewhere. Documentation that the defense would later use to question her stability. The FBI agents visited twice more, asking detailed questions about the website, the videos, the timeline. They were building a case, but federal investigations moved slowly. They couldn't guarantee results before our family court hearings. Catherine explained that Dad's lawyer had filed for a modification of the no-contact order. He claimed the restrictions were preventing him from preparing an adequate defense. He needed to assess the family dynamic for his case. The judge would hear arguments next week. The Johnstons increased security measures. They installed motion sensor lights around the property. They gave us each personal alarms. They changed their routine routes to school, to the store, to everywhere. But we all knew these were band-aids on a wound that needed surgery. Mom's lawyer sent another letter, this time to the Johnstons directly. It questioned their fitness as foster parents, suggested they were manipulating us for financial gain from the state. It mentioned a private investigator had been observing the home. It hinted at a formal complaint being filed. Mr. Johnston's jaw clenched as he read it aloud at the kitchen table. Mrs. Johnston reached for his hand. They'd been nothing but kind to us, and now they were being dragged into our parents' web of manipulation. That night, Kesha knocked on my door. She sat on my bed, Max between us, and we talked without words. Just sat there, understanding flowing between us. She showed me new scars on her arms, thin lines hidden under long sleeves. I showed her the bald spot where I'd been pulling my hair out. We were both breaking in different ways. The hearing about the no-contact order arrived too quickly. We sat in a small courtroom, Dad at a table across from us. He wore a conservative suit, his hair neatly trimmed. He looked like any respectable father. He kept trying to catch our eyes, his expression carefully crafted to show pain and longing. His lawyer argued eloquently about parental rights, about the lack of physical evidence, about the need for supervised visitation to assess the family situation. He painted Dad as a victim of a misunderstanding, a father desperate to reconnect with his daughters. Catherine countered with the evidence she had, but so much had been thrown out. The judge listened, nodded, asked questions. In the end, he ruled for limited supervised contact, 1 hour per week, at a court-approved facility, with a social worker present. Kesha grabbed my hand so hard I thought bones might break. Catherine immediately filed for reconsideration, but the damage was done. We would have to see him again. The first supervised visit was scheduled for the following Saturday. The Johnstons drove us to the Family Services Building, a gray concrete structure that smelled like disinfectant and despair. The social worker, a tired-looking woman named Joni, led us to a small room with toys meant for younger children and inspirational posters peeling at the corners. Dad arrived precisely on time. He'd brought photo albums, as if we were going to sit around reminiscing about happier times. He spoke softly, chose his words carefully, aware of the social worker taking notes. He talked about missing us, about wanting to heal our family, about forgiveness and moving forward. Kesha stared at a spot on the wall behind his head. Well, I guess nothing says, I understand the gravity of my crimes, like pretending this is a family reunion instead of legally mandated supervision. I focused on counting the tiles on the floor, 12 by 15, 180 tiles, the same number of days he'd been in jail. When he reached for Kesha's hand, she flinched backwards so violently she knocked over her chair. The social worker made a note. Dad's mask slipped for just a second, a flash of the real him showing through, before he composed himself and apologized for startling her. The hour felt like a year. When Joni finally announced time was up, Dad hugged himself dramatically, as if prevented from embracing his children. He left the photo albums on the table, told us to keep them, to remember the good times. In the car afterward, Kesha vomited into a plastic bag Mrs. Johnston had thoughtfully brought. I stared out the window, watching normal families go about their Saturday errands, wondering if we'd ever be normal again. The visits became a weekly torture. Dad grew bolder each time, pushing boundaries within the constraints of supervision. He'd tell stories about our childhood that painted him as a devoted father. He'd bring gifts that reminded us of specific moments we wanted to forget. He'd mention Mom constantly, how much she missed us, how broken she was without her girls. The social worker's reports noted our resistance to reconciliation and inability to engage in the healing process. Catherine explained these reports would be used in the custody hearing. The system designed to protect us was slowly being turned against us. Meanwhile, the harassment at school escalated. Someone spray-painted liar on Kesha's locker. My gym clothes were stolen and found in the toilet. Teachers stopped calling on us in class, not wanting to deal with the disruption our presence seemed to cause. The principal called a meeting with the Johnstons. He suggested delicately that perhaps alternative schooling would be better for everyone. Homeschooling or online programs, less disruption for the other students, less stress for us. Mrs. Johnston argued fiercely, but we could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Catherine's updates grew less optimistic. The FBI investigation was stalled. The digital evidence was being challenged. Dad's lawyer had hired experts to dispute everything. The prosecution's case was hanging by threads, and those threads were fraying. One evening, Mr. Johnston discovered their car tires had been slashed. All 4 clean cuts that insurance would cover, but that sent a clear message. The security cameras showed nothing. The police took a report, added it to a growing file that led nowhere. Mrs. Johnston started looking over her shoulder everywhere she went. She'd been followed to the grocery store, to work, to her sister's house. Never threateningly, just present. A reminder that our problems had become their problems. The Johnstons never complained, never suggested we were too much trouble, but we could see the strain. The way they jumped at unexpected noises, the way they checked locks multiple times, the way their easy smiles had become forced. During one supervised visit, Dad brought a laptop. He wanted to show us family videos, he said. Happy memories from before things went wrong. Joni allowed it, not seeing the harm. But Kesha and I recognized the trap. These weren't random videos. Each one was carefully selected to remind us of his control, of moments when he'd touched us inappropriately, but made it look innocent on camera. Kesha excused herself to the bathroom and didn't return. I found her in the hallway, pressing her forehead against the cool concrete wall. Joni had to file an incident report about Kesha's emotional instability during the visit. Catherine called an emergency meeting. She laid out the reality. The criminal case was weak. The custody battle was tilting in our parents' favor. The supervised visits were being used to document our unwillingness to reunify. Without new evidence or a significant development, we were looking at a possible return to our parents' custody within months. The Johnstons asked about adoption, about permanent guardianship, about any legal way to keep us safe. Catherine explained the process, the requirements, the ways our parents could block it. Every path seemed to lead back to them. That night, I heard Kesha on the phone with a sewer slide prevention hotline. Her voice was steady, clinical, as she discussed methods and probabilities. Not actively planning, just researching, preparing for a worst-case scenario. I sat outside her door until dawn, making sure she didn't go beyond talking. The next supervised visit, Mom appeared. Not in the room, but in the parking lot. She stood by a car, watching us enter the building. Just watching, making sure we saw her, making sure we knew she was there. The no-contact order apparently didn't apply to standing in public spaces. Inside, Dad talked about Mom's depression, her breakdown since we'd left. He showed us pictures of her looking gaunt and hollow-eyed. He mentioned casually that she'd been hospitalized twice for emotional distress. The implication was clear. We were culling our mother with our selfishness. Kesha finally spoke during that visit. Just one sentence. She looked Dad straight in the eye and said she remembered everything. His face went still. Joni made a note about Keisha's first verbal engagement in weeks. The drive home was silent. Even Max seemed to sense the heaviness, lying quietly on the floor instead of his usual seat hopping. The Johnstons exchanged worried glances at every red light. Catherine filed motion after motion. Requests to suspend visits, appeals for reconsideration, petitions for extended protection. Each one was met with counter motions from Dad's lawyer. The legal bills were mounting. The state's resources were limited. Catherine was doing what she could with what she had, but it wasn't enough. The principal called again. This time the suggestion was less delicate. The disruption to the school environment had become untenable. Other parents were complaining. The board was asking questions. Perhaps it would be best if we finished the semester from home. Mrs. Johnston set up a homeschool schedule. She adjusted her work hours to supervise our studies. Mr. Johnston built desks in the spare room. They tried to make it feel like a choice, an adventure in alternative education. But we all knew it was another victory for our parents. Another way they'd isolated us. The weekly visits grew more unbearable. Dad had learned exactly how far he could push without triggering intervention. He'd rest his hand on the table, fingers spread, in the exact position he used to before calling us over. He'd use specific phrases that brought back memories we'd tried to bury. He'd hum songs he used to play during his projects. Joni noticed our distress but attributed it to the normal difficulty of reconciliation. Her reports mentioned our continued resistance, an inability to process therapeutic interventions. Each observation became ammunition for the other side. Catherine warned us that Dad's lawyer was pushing for unsupervised visits. The supervised ones were going so well, he argued. The girls were clearly struggling with the artificial environment. Perhaps a more natural setting would facilitate healing. A restaurant, maybe. Or a park. Somewhere the family could interact normally. The thought of being alone with him again, even in public, made my stomach churn. Kesha stopped eating almost entirely. The Johnstons tried everything, but she'd only manage a few bites before pushing the plate away. Her clothes hung looser each week. One afternoon, while the Johnstons were at work, someone knocked on the door. Through the peephole, I saw a woman with a clipboard. She identified herself as being from Child Protective Services, following up on a complaint. The complaint alleged educational neglect, medical neglect, and inappropriate isolation of minors. I didn't open the door. Instead, I called Mrs. Johnston, who called Catherine, who confirmed no CPS visit was scheduled. The woman left after 10 minutes, but the message was clear. Our parents could reach us even here. They could make the Johnstons' lives miserable for helping us. The stress was affecting everyone. Mr. Johnston developed insomnia. Mrs. Johnston started having migraines. They whispered arguments in their bedroom about finances, about safety, about how long they could maintain this level of vigilance. They never said we were a burden, but we could feel the weight we'd placed on their shoulders. During the next visit, Dad brought legal papers. He showed them to Joni first, getting permission. Then he placed them on the table. Emancipation documents. If we were so unhappy with our parents, he said, perhaps we'd prefer to be on our own. Of course, at our ages, emancipation was unlikely to be granted, but the threat was clear. Play along or be cast into the system. Kesha laughed. Not a happy sound, but sharp and bitter. She laughed until tears ran down her face, until Joni looked genuinely concerned. When she finally stopped, she stared at Dad with eyes that held no fear anymore, just exhaustion. That night, Catherine called with news. The FBI had found something. Not enough for federal charges yet, but evidence that the website existed, that money had changed hands. It would take time to build the case, but it was something. A glimmer of hope in the darkness. But time was what we didn't have. The family court judge had scheduled a hearing to review the custody arrangement. Dad's lawyer was pushing for reunification. The supervised visits, the psychological evaluations, the social worker reports, all would be considered. Catherine prepared us for the possibility that we might be ordered to return home. The Johnstons started teaching us practical things. How to barricade a door. How to use the emergency phones they bought us. How to leave evidence trails if something happened. They tried to make it seem like general safety education, but we knew they were preparing us for the worst. 2 nights before the custody hearing, Kesha woke me at 3 a.m. Counting floor tiles during family visits is definitely a new coping strategy I haven't seen before, though I guess it beats counting the minutes until this nightmare ends, which would take way more math skills than anyone should need in this situation. She held a backpack, wore dark clothes. She'd been planning to run, not sewer slide, but disappearance. She'd researched homeless shelters in distant cities, calculated how far her saved allowance would take her. She reasoned that if she vanished, at least I'd be safe with the Johnstons. I talked her out of it, reminded her that running would only prove Dad's point about her instability, that it would leave me alone in the fight, that we'd promised to protect each other. She unpacked the bag, but I saw her look at it sometimes, the escape route she kept in reserve. The morning of the custody hearing arrived gray and drizzling. The Johnstons dressed us in conservative clothes, tried to make us eat breakfast. Catherine Catherine met us at the courthouse, her face carefully neutral, but her briefcase bulging with documents. Inside the courtroom, our parents sat with their lawyers. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Dad wore a cross pendant I'd never seen before. They looked like grieving parents desperate to reunite with their children. They looked believable. The judge entered, and our futures hung in the balance. Catherine stood to present our case, and I gripped Kesha's hand under the table. Whatever happened next, we would face it together. We'd survived this long. Somehow, we'd survive whatever came next. The judge reviewed papers for what felt like hours. Catherine presented evidence methodically while Dad's lawyer countered each point. Mom kept dabbing her eyes, playing the grieving mother perfectly. Dad maintained his concerned father act, occasionally glancing at us with practiced sorrow. During a recess, Catherine pulled us aside in the hallway. She explained the judge seemed sympathetic to parental rights arguments. The lack of physical evidence was hurting us. The supervised visit reports painted us as uncooperative. She squeezed my shoulder, trying to stay optimistic, but I saw the defeat creeping into her eyes. Back in the courtroom, Dad's lawyer called Joni to testify. She described our resistance during visits, Kesha's bathroom incidents, our refusal to engage with family photos. She used clinical language that made our trauma sound like teenage stubbornness. Catherine's cross-examination revealed Joni's limited training in abuse cases, but the damage was done. The judge announced he'd review everything and issue a decision within 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks stretched endlessly. The Johnstons tried maintaining normal routines, but we all felt the sword hanging over our heads. Kesha barely left her room. I threw myself into homeschool work, solving equations until numbers blurred together. Catherine called daily with updates. The FBI investigation had stalled again. Dad's lawyer filed more motions. Mom's lawyer pushed for immediate reunification. The system ground forward, indifferent to our fear. One evening, Mr. Johnston found our mailbox stuffed with printed emails. Fake correspondence between Kesha and older men, discussing running away together. The timestamps showed dates when we'd been locked in our rooms without phones or computers. More fabricated evidence of our troubled behavior. Catherine added them to her files, but explained proving they were fake would take forensic analysis the state couldn't afford. Dad had planned this carefully, creating doubt about everything we said. Each piece of false evidence chipped away at our credibility. The next supervised visit felt different. Dad arrived with a briefcase instead of photo albums. He pulled out report cards, medical records, documentation of our lives before the arrest. He talked about our achievements, our potential, how much we'd lost by being separated from family. Joni nodded along, making notes about his genuine concern for our futures. When he mentioned college funds he'd saved for us, money that would disappear if we remained estranged, Kesha's hands clenched in her lap. He was right. Without family support, our futures looked bleak. The Johnstons couldn't afford college for us. The state certainly wouldn't pay. He'd found another pressure point. That night, Kesha showed me acceptance letters she'd hidden. Full scholarships to schools across the country, applied for secretly with her counselor's help. She'd been planning her escape through education. But the letters required parental signatures, financial information, legal guardianship documentation. Without our parents' cooperation, even these opportunities would vanish. The decision day arrived with unseasonable heat. The courthouse air conditioning struggled, leaving everyone sweating in formal clothes. Catherine met us outside, her expression carefully neutral. She'd already seen the ruling. Inside, the judge delivered his decision in measured tones. The evidence of abuse was inconclusive. The supervised visits showed potential for reconciliation. The parents had completed court-ordered counseling. He was modifying custody arrangements. We would begin transitional visits. 2 hours unsupervised, then overnight weekends, building toward full reunification within 6 months. My vision tunneled. Beside me, Kesha went completely still. The Johnstons gripped each other's hands. Catherine immediately stood to file an emergency appeal, but we all knew appeals took time we didn't have. Outside the courthouse, Dad approached with his lawyer. Legal now. The no-contact order was lifted. He reached for Kesha, who stepped backward into Mr. Johnston. Dad's mask slipped for just a moment, that familiar anger flashing, before his lawyer touched his arm. Not here. Not yet. The drive home was silent until Kesha spoke. She outlined her plan calmly. She would comply with visits, play along, convince them she was broken, obedient, buy time until her 18th birthday, keep them focused on her so they'd leave me alone. The same sacrifice, just a different form. I started to protest, but she cut me off. This was survival now. We'd work within the system that had failed us, document everything, wait for the FBI investigation, hope for criminal charges before full reunification. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. The first unsupervised visit was scheduled for the following Saturday. The Johnstons drove us to a neutral location, a family restaurant chosen by the court. They'd wait in the parking lot, watching for our return. Mrs. Johnston hugged us both, whispering reminders about the panic buttons in our pockets. Dad arrived alone, Mom supposedly too emotional to attend. He'd chosen a corner booth, away from other diners. For 2 hours, he talked about rebuilding our family. His words were careful, knowing we might be recording, but his eyes held promises of what would happen when we were truly alone again. When he reached across the table, Kesha let him take her hand. I watched her disconnect, the same empty stare from years before. She was already sacrificing herself again. I kicked her under the table, refusing to let her carry this alone. The visits continued weekly. Each time, Dad pushed boundaries a little further, a hand on a shoulder, an arm around a waist, comments about how much we'd grown, the gradual grooming beginning again, but legal now, court-sanctioned. Catherine filed every motion possible, but the system moved slowly. The FBI investigation hit more roadblocks. Dad's lawyer challenged every piece of evidence. The criminal case was crumbling while the family court pushed us closer to reunification. 3 weeks into unsupervised visits, Dad announced overnight weekends would begin soon. He'd prepared our old rooms. Mom was eager to have her girls home. He mentioned this while gripping Kesha's wrist, his thumb pressing into her pulse point, a reminder of his control. That night, I found Kesha in the bathroom with a bottle of pills, not taking them, just holding them, counting. She'd stolen them from Mom's purse during our last visit. Insurance, she called them. If things got too bad, she'd have a way out. I flushed them down the toilet while she watched, emotionless. The Johnstons were fraying. Constant vigilance was exhausting them. Their marriage strained under the pressure. They'd started arguing about money, about the danger we'd brought into their lives. They never said we weren't worth it, but we could see them breaking. During the next visit, Dad brought legal papers, consent forms for therapy, medical releases, school enrollment documents. He needed our signatures to complete the reunification process. When we hesitated, he mentioned the Johnstons, how stressed they looked, how unfair it was to burden them, how much easier everything would be if we just came home. Kesha signed signed first. Her hand was steady, but I saw the defeat in her eyes. I signed next, each letter feeling like a betrayal of everything we'd fought for. Dad collected the papers with satisfaction, tucking them into his briefcase. The trap was closing. Catherine made one last attempt. She'd found a specialist in family trauma who could evaluate us, potentially provide evidence to halt reunification. But the evaluation would take weeks. The first overnight visit was in 3 days. Time had run out. The night before our first overnight, the Johnstons sat us down. They'd decided to fight for permanent guardianship. They'd hire their own lawyer, drain their savings if necessary. They couldn't let us go back. But we all knew Dad would never sign away his rights. Not when he was this close to getting us back. Friday arrived too quickly. The Johnstons packed our overnight bags with hidden phones, emergency numbers written in permanent marker inside our shoes. Mrs. Johnston's hands shook as she zipped the bags. Mr. Johnston checked and rechecked that the tracking apps on our phones were working. At the drop-off point, Dad waited by his car. He'd brought flowers, playing the doting father for anyone watching. His smile was triumphant as we climbed into the back seat. The Johnstons followed us to the edge of their permitted distance, then pulled over to wait. Flowers for a court-mandated reunion? That's like bringing a party hat to your own execution. Technically festive, but missing the point entirely. Nothing says loving father quite like triumph disguised as tulips. Just 2 days, Mrs. Johnston had whispered. They'd be counting every hour. The drive to our old house felt like traveling backward through time. Each familiar street brought back memories we'd tried to bury. Dad chatted about normal things, traffic, weather, plans for the weekend, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. When we pulled into the driveway, Mom stood on the porch. She'd lost weight, her clothes hanging loose, but her eyes held the same cold calculation. She hugged us for the benefit of watching neighbors, whispering welcomes that sounded like warnings. Inside, nothing had changed. The same furniture, the same photos on the walls. Even our rooms were exactly as we'd left them, like shrines to the children we'd been. Dad carried our bags upstairs, mentioning he'd installed new locks. For our safety, he said, to help us feel secure. Dinner was a performance. Mom had cooked our old favorites. Dad told stories about work. They acted like nothing had happened, like the past year was just a bad dream we were waking from. Kesha pushed food around her plate. I managed a few bites before my stomach rebelled. After dinner, Dad suggested watching a movie together. Family time, he called it. We sat on the couch, parents on either side of us. Dad's arm draped across Kesha's shoulders. Mom's hand rested on my knee. The movie played, but no one watched. We were all waiting for the pretense to drop. When bedtime came, Mom walked us upstairs. She showed us the new locks on our doors, demonstrating how they worked. From the inside only, she assured us. We could lock ourselves in for privacy, but I noticed the hinges were on the outside. The doors could be removed entirely if needed. In my room, I found everything exactly as I'd left it. Even the hidden phone from before was still in my dresser drawer, though the battery was dead. I locked the door and pushed my dresser against it, then sat on my bed fully clothed, counting minutes until morning. Around midnight, footsteps paused outside my door. The doorknob turned slowly, testing. Finding it locked, the footsteps moved on. I heard them stop at Kesha's door. A soft knock, murmuring voices, then silence. I pressed my ear against the wall between our rooms but heard nothing. Morning came without incident. At breakfast, Kesha looked exhausted but unharmed. Dad was cheerful, suggesting activities for the day, a trip to the park, shopping for new clothes, normal family outings that felt like threats. Mom watched us eat, noting every bite. The day passed in surreal normalcy. We walked through stores, ate lunch at a restaurant. Dad kept his hands visible, touches brief and appropriate. Mom chatted about redecorating our rooms. Anyone watching would see a family reconnecting. No one would notice Kesha's vacant stare or my white knuckles. Saturday night arrived with dread. After dinner, Dad mentioned needing to discuss expectations for when we moved back permanently. Rules about respect, about family loyalty, about not spreading lies. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes held warnings. Mom nodded along, adding comments about second chances and forgiveness. When bedtime came again, I barricaded my door more thoroughly, added a chair under the doorknob, piled books on the windowsill to alert me if anyone tried that route. I lay awake listening for footsteps, for Kesha's door, for any sound of distress. The footsteps came at 2 a.m. They paused at my door, tested the knob, found it secured, moved to Kesha's room. This time I heard her door open, close. Silence that stretched forever. I pressed against the wall, straining to hear anything. Nothing. Sunday morning, Kesha emerged with long sleeves despite the heat. She moved carefully, like something hurt. At breakfast, she didn't meet my eyes. Dad was extra attentive, refilling her juice, offering more toast. Mom commented on how nice it was to have her girls home. The hours until pickup crawled by. We played board games, Dad's choice. Watched another movie, made cookies with Mom. Every moment felt like performance art. Finally, 5 p.m. approached. Time to pack our bags. Time to return to the Johnstons. Dad drove us back to the meeting point, talking about next weekend's plans. Maybe we'd redecorate our rooms together, start fresh, build new memories. His words sounded reasonable. His tone stayed light, but Kesha flinched when he adjusted the rearview mirror. The Johnstons were waiting exactly where they'd promised. Mrs. Johnston's relief was visible from across the parking lot. We transferred bags and bodies quickly. Dad mentioned he'd see us Friday, reminded us to think about paint colors for our rooms, waved as we drove away. Back at the Johnstons, Kesha went straight to her room. I followed, but she'd already locked the door. Through the wood, I heard water running. The shower again. Always the shower after Dad's special attention. I sat in the hallway until the water stopped, until I heard her climb into bed. Monday brought an emergency meeting with Catherine. We reported the weekend in detail. The locks that could trap us. The midnight visits. Kesha's careful movements. Catherine documented everything but explained it wasn't enough. No visible injuries, no witnesses, just our word against theirs. And the court had already decided our word wasn't enough. The FBI agent called that afternoon. They'd traced some financial transactions, found connections to the website, but building a federal case would take months. The agent apologized, knowing we didn't have months. Reunification was moving faster than justice. That week, Dad's lawyer filed papers to accelerate the timeline. The weekend visits had gone well. The girls were adjusting. The foster family was showing signs of stress. Perhaps it would be better for everyone to complete reunification sooner. The court date was set for 2 weeks. Kesha stopped eating entirely. The school counselor called daily. Mrs. Johnston tried everything, but Kesha had made her decision. If she got sick enough, hospitalized, maybe it would delay things. Buy more time. It was the only control she had left. By Thursday, she'd lost enough weight that her clothes hung loose. Dark circles ringed her eyes. When she fainted during homeschool lessons, Mrs. Johnston rushed her to the emergency room. The doctors admitted her for evaluation dehydration, started IV fluids, called in a psychiatric consult. The hospital social worker reviewed her history, the previous sewer slide attempt, the current self-harm through starvation. She recommended inpatient treatment. Dad arrived within hours, playing the concerned father. He had legal rights. He wanted his daughter transferred to a facility of his choosing. Catherine fought back, but Dad had the law on his side. Kesha was transferred to the same facility from years before, the one where Dad's connections had influence, where her records could be adjusted, where she'd be isolated from anyone who might help. I visited once before Dad restricted access. Kesha looked smaller in the hospital gown. She grabbed my hand, whispered that she was buying me time, that I should use it, find evidence, get help, don't waste what she was sacrificing. The nurse ended our visit after 10 minutes. With Kesha gone, the pressure shifted to me. Dad called daily, concerned about my sister, suggesting I move home early to help with her recovery. Mom sent letters about family healing. The Johnstons tried to shield me, but the walls were closing in. Catherine made one final push. She'd found a judge willing to review everything. An emergency hearing was scheduled. She warned me not to get hopes up, but it was our last chance. The hearing would be in 3 days. Kesha would still be hospitalized. It might work in our favor. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I reviewed everything in my mind, every piece of evidence, every moment of testimony I'd need to give, every detail that might finally make someone believe us. At 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and sat at my window, watching the street for blue sedans. Morning came gray and humid. Catherine met us at the courthouse with files and determination. She'd pulled every string, called in every favor. This judge had a reputation for protecting children. He'd review everything fresh, no assumptions, no bias, just facts. The courtroom was smaller this time, more private. Dad and his lawyer sat across from us, but Mom was absent. Dad wore his concerned father mask, but I saw him checking his phone repeatedly. Something was making him nervous. Catherine presented our case methodically. The timeline, the evidence, the patterns of control and manipulation. She'd brought the FBI agent to testify about the investigation's progress. She'd subpoenaed Kesha's real medical records, not the edited versions. She laid out years of abuse in clinical detail. Dad's lawyer tried his usual tactics, but this judge wasn't having it. He asked pointed questions, demanded specific answers. When Dad tried to deflect with emotional appeals, the judge shut him down. Just facts, just evidence. Then Catherine played her final card. She'd found something in the financial records. Small transfers Dad thought were hidden. Payments to the facility where Kesha was being held. Payments to staff members. A paper trail of corruption that even his lawyer couldn't explain away. The judge called a recess. We waited in the hallway while he reviewed everything. Dad paced, making phone calls. His lawyer looked less confident. Catherine squeezed my hand, cautiously optimistic. The FBI agent made his own calls, mentioning warrants and asset freezing. When we returned, the judge's expression was grave. He'd made his decision. The evidence of ongoing manipulation was clear. The financial irregularities suggested broader corruption. He was reversing the reunification order, granting permanent guardianship to the Johnstons, ordering Dad's arrest on new charges related to the financial crimes. Dad erupted, screaming about rights, about conspiracies, about ungrateful children. Court officers restrained him as his lawyer tried to maintain control. The judge continued reading his order. Kesha would be immediately transferred to a legitimate treatment facility. All parental rights were terminated. The criminal investigation would proceed. Within hours, everything changed. Dad was arrested on federal charges. The financial crimes had given them jurisdiction. Mom was picked up as an accomplice. The facility where Kesha was held faced investigation. Staff members were suspended. Records were seized. I rode with the Johnstons to get Kesha. She was sitting in the common room when we arrived, staring at nothing. When I told her it was over, really over, she didn't believe me at first. Only when Mrs. Johnston showed her the court orders did something shift in her eyes. Not quite hope, but the possibility of it. The drive to the new hospital was quiet. Kesha needed real treatment now, for the damage years of abuse had caused. But this time, she'd be safe. No hidden payments, no corrupted staff, just doctors who wanted to help her heal. That night, I sat in my room at the Johnstons' house. For the first time in years, I didn't barricade the door. Didn't lie awake listening for footsteps. The house felt different, lighter, like a weight had lifted that we'd carried so long we'd forgotten it was there. The next months would be hard. There would be trials, testimony, Kesha's recovery, our own healing. But we'd survived the worst. The system had finally worked, imperfectly, and almost too late. But it had worked. We were safe. We were believed. We were free. The Johnstons started adoption paperwork the next week. No more foster care, no more temporary, just family, chosen and fought for. Catherine visited regularly, helping us navigate the legal aftermath. The FBI agent kept us updated on the investigation. More victims had come forward. The website was shut down. Justice was slow, but thorough. Kesha came home after 6 weeks of treatment. Still fragile, still healing, but present in a way she hadn't been in years. We painted our rooms at the Johnstons' house, hung new curtains, made it truly ours. Small acts of claiming space, of believing in permanence. School started again in the fall. Real school, not hiding at home. The whispers had stopped. The truth had a way of silencing lies. We made friends slowly, cautiously, learned to trust in small increments, discovered who we were outside of survival mode. Some nights, the memories still came. Kesha still showered too long sometimes. I still checked locks more than necessary. Healing wasn't linear, but we had time now. Time and safety and people who loved us without conditions or expectations. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thanks for reading this story with me. Like the video if you want to see more of this.